Everyone. We're so grateful to have you all here today. I just checked a few minutes ago, and I think we have over 45 people from state agencies around the United States registered today. My name is Malika. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Esper. Esper is a policy and regulation management platform that I started in 2018 with the mission of creating an operating system for policy and government. Today, Esper is fortunate to work with dozens of government agencies around the United States to support their important policy and rulemaking, including the New Hampshire Department of Education. So today, I'm very grateful to be joined by Julie Shea with the New Hampshire Department of Education to discuss how she heads up the rulemaking process at her agency. To give you an idea of the flow for today, I'm going to formally introduce Julie, read her bio. We'll have a conversation about what rulemaking looks like at the New Hampshire Department of Education, and we'll also save time at the end for audience Q&A. So if you've got questions, you'll be able to raise your hand or pop them in the chat box, and we'll cover those at the end. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Julie Shea is the Administrative Rules Coordinator at the New Hampshire Department of Education. She joined the department in August 2022, so almost exactly a year ago. Prior to state employment, she worked in learning and development in the private sector, where she was very instrumental in administrating the company's learning management system, as well as overseeing the implementation and daily management of the internal intranet. So tools and technology is very familiar to Julie. Outside of work, Julie serves on several boards and committees in her community and performs regular community theater. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Very grateful to have you here. I thought that we could start by maybe describing your role a little bit at the New Hampshire Department of Education. What does being an administrative rules coordinator entail, and where does your role sit within the overall department?
Sure. So I am the only rules person within the agency, and it's kind of an odd place where it's in the office of the commissioner, and I report directly to an attorney who's the general counsel and who oversees the rule process. Additionally, the Department of Education has a state board of ed, so all of our rulemaking has to go through that state board. And then we also have a bunch of advisory boards as well. So I do a lot of coordinating, making sure that the boards are on top of the rules, which rules need to be updated if they're coming up on expiration dates. And then the advisory boards will bring those to the state board. And so I coordinate those efforts and make sure that everything meets the deadlines. And then when it goes to our Joint Legislative Committee of Administrative Rules for JLCAR, that whole process and the public part of it with the public hearing and making sure that everything has been publicly registered on the register and all that. Was a little clunky, but
No, I mean, it's super helpful. I think a lot of state agencies have like a similar setup where there's sort of a central person or team that manages the rulemaking process. In an agency, usually it sits within the general counsel's office because legal is typically involved in the rulemaking process, making sure everything is correct and efficacious and legal standards. What was your exposure to rulemaking before joining the department? Were you involved in it in the private sector? What was the learning curve like for you?
I was not involved in it at all, other than needing to follow rules and regulations in banking because that's where it came from. So I was familiar with what they were and that they existed, but I was not
Okay, I'm back on. Not sure what happened there. Bit of a connection issue. I've got full steam ahead on my internet, so hopefully everything's okay. I missed that last bit.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
Not sure.
Um,
Sorry, you were saying you were complying with sort of financial regulations in the private sector, but it was a bit of a learning curve coming into state government and taking on this role.
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with the process at all, and so I had to read up on RSA 541A, the Administrative Rules Procedure Act, the manual. I fortunately found a contact at another agency. I kind of, in all of my research, found someone else whose name was on a lot of registers and reached out to see if they would talk about their experience with me, and that was super helpful. I find that talking to someone who does a similar role is really nice in getting the nuances that you might not get from reading a manual. So
Yeah, most states have like these state produced manuals on how to cross your T's, dot your I's when it comes to rulemaking, but when it comes to the nuance of managing particular deadlines or organizing stakeholders, it can be quite intense. And I think that like having a peer in another agency is super helpful as well.
yeah, especially where I'm the only one here. Some other
Yeah.
agencies have more than one person, but I'm a solo show here, so it's good to make contacts elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think, Esper was already live at the department when you started. So I'm hoping we were a little bit useful to you in getting up and running there as well.
Yes, it was so helpful because I had someone on the other end who understood the process as a whole and obviously was able to help me get up and running with the software and how that worked. But it was so good having another contact outside of the agency that I could ask questions to about how it worked and how the deadlines in there were put in because everything existed before me. So
can you explain a little bit about the rulemaking process in New Hampshire, from maybe what you learned from your peer and the other state agency, the types of rulemakings that you do, and you also mentioned expiring rules and how that all sort of fits within the bounds of Esper?
So yeah, we have three basic rulemaking processes. We have our regular rulemaking process. Once that, for us, we have to go to the state board first. So everything is timed by the meetings. And so I have to make a timeline and kind of work backwards based on when meetings occur with all of the different committees. So once the state board has approved an initial proposal, then we move forward and we have 180 days to bring it through that process. There's a public hearing process that has to be noticed 20 days before. And again, our public hearings have to happen at board meetings. So there's space in between things in our process that don't necessarily exist for agencies that don't have to align things with the boards. And then there's the final proposal process. We get commentary from the Office of Legislative Services. We bring that through, and then it goes to our Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules. They approve it, and then it goes back to the board and they adopt it. So that's the regular rulemaking process. And then we have an interim rulemaking process that is a little bit truncated so that if there are reasons that a rule needs to move more quickly, then it skips the public hearing process. But those rules are only good for a certain amount of time. So typically you have to engage in the regular rulemaking process kind of at the same time. And interim rules can get a little sticky because they do expire within 6 months. And then if they don't have another rule moving along with them, the other rule disappears as well. So that can leave you with no rules. And then there's the emergency rulemaking process. I personally haven't had to use that. I think it got used a lot during the pandemic. And it's there for emergencies when something needs to be put into rule. I just lost my train of thought. So yeah, those are the three basic processes. And then you had another part to the question, I think.
I think maybe we can talk a little bit. I think one of the most strikingly complicated parts, I think, of your department's rulemaking in particular is just the managing of timelines.
Mhm.
So you've got, the state board, you've also got your commissioner where you're trying to move it on different tracks.
Yep.
How is ESPER helping with that in terms
Yeah.
of timeline management?
So for me, I have all of my projects in Esper, and so each rulemaking process is set up as a project, and all of my timelines are in there. And Esper helped to set up all of the dates that need to fit in with our process for the various rulemaking processes. And so I can actually assign those different tasks out to people. So if I have a draft that needs to be looked at, I can assign that out to somebody and then they can look at it and then assign it back, or you can comment on the drafts. And then once we've approved that task and we've moved into the next one, that's the one that pops up. And it also sends reminders. So I will have program people reaching out to me saying, oh, I just got a reminder in Esper, like, do you need this from me now? And so then they'll go in and either complete the task or, we'll meet over it. So it really helps all of the timelines stay kind of front of mind for everybody. I also use the comments a lot because I make sure that when I've submitted something, I've put it in there. So if someone wants to go in and see updates, they can.
Mhm.
And I also use Esper to kind of hold all of my documents. So in addition to the documents I'm working on, I put all of my correspondence in there so that if any of my program people want to go in and look at it or find it, it's in one central place. So if they're looking for the comments from OLS, they're going to see it in that rulemaking package, or they're going to see the GELCAR approval letter in there. So they can go in and get anything they want. And then we have the ability to export and import drafts. So if I don't have someone that's working in Esper, and not all of the program people are, I can import that draft into Esper so that I have a common draft, or I can export it out and work in different formats for that, so that I always know which draft is the most recent and which one I'm using to continue forward.
Yeah, it's it becomes sort of like this hub, right, for an individual rulemaking. And if you've got like a dozen rulemakings going on at once, each with their own distinct timeline, that really adds up to a lot of complexity. And so you can quickly go in and say, okay, this is the rulemaking, the step that it's in, who we need it, the next step on, what the action items are. All of it is very clearly laid out. And we so often work with agencies that have, one person managing this for an entire team. And it's very overwhelming without technology, particularly if you're also trying to track nuance, like what you described around interim rules that are going to expire in 6 months if you don't have another one coming up as well. So it really becomes like the home base for rulemaking and policy for some agencies as well. Yeah.
And as only one person, like, I use it to keep track of everything, but I can only imagine if there was multiple rulemaking folks, they could go in and if you have someone in the agency that's asking one rulemaking person, but it's not their assignment, they can still go in and get a live update on all of those different projects or where they're at, which is a nice thing as well, so that anyone can kind of go in and see what's going on.
Totally. And I think the version control, we hear this a lot, where some agencies truly are still using paper in their rulemaking processes. So version control is an absolute nightmare in that case. But even when you're attaching a Word document to an email that you're going to send out to 15 people, the version control on that just gets really complicated pretty quickly. So having a collaborative text editor where you can, comment on it and ask someone to go in and leave edits or make changes is super valuable as well.
I've used it sometimes when I'm in meetings, like on Teams, and we're all in Esper and we can all in live time edit the document and see each other editing it and kind of talk about it. And, we're all in that one document, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. How often are you conducting rulemakings at the Department of Ed? Is there seasonality to it? I know it's back to school season right now, or is it, driven by legislative session? How do you see the ebb and flow of rulemakings?
A little bit of everything. We are driven a little bit by the school year because a lot of our advisory boards only meet during the school year. So I don't have those advisory boards that are looking at rules going on during the summer.
Mhm.
But during the summer, we also have the legislative session wrapping up. So if there's new legislation that's going to be affecting rules, then we end up seeing a lot of activity then. So right now I have quite a few new rulemakings going on just based on new legislation. So there's a little bit of an ebb and flow, but it's pretty consistently constant through the year.
Yeah, happening quite a bit.
Yeah.
The advisory boards, I think, is really interesting. You've got not only the state board, but also these sort of, advisors, different stakeholder groups. How do you collect feedback from them? And out of curiosity, are you required to incorporate their feedback? How does that tie into like the public comment process for typical rulemakings?
So a lot of our advisory boards are actually in statute that they exist.
Mhm.
And for I attend meetings for some of the advisory boards, especially. So one of our biggest kind of rulemaking bodies as an advisory board is the Professional Standards Board. They work on all of the certification rules for educators. And so it's made up of people from the field. And so they have subcommittees that are always working on updating rules. So they start rules quite in advance in terms of when expiration dates fall or when they want to see a final product. And the state board does not have to take any of the recommendations that the advisory boards have, but they are the ones that usually will put together a draft. And then I facilitate bringing it to the board. Usually someone from the advisory board will come with me to the meetings or kind of be there as someone that can answer any content questions. But yeah, we have quite a few just based on certification, teacher programs. They pull people from the field for almost all of the different areas that need rules. So there are a lot of stakeholders involved in the education rules.
Yeah, it's not like it's a contentious space at all. I'm sure every state agency listening is like, well, my agency is more contentious. Are you looking at statute federally at all when it comes to incorporating legislation or legislative changes into your rules? Is it mostly state law driven, or are you bringing in federal as well?
It depends on the areas. So for example, special education refers back to federal statute a lot. So, and then some of the funding and stuff like that is federal, but most of what I look at is state statutes. I kind of rely on my program people to know the federal side and if they have federal regulation that they need to incorporate into the rules.
Gotcha. One of the things that a lot of people find is like a bonus in ESPER is we have this database of state and federal laws and regulations inside. So for example, if a federal SNAP or food and nutrition program changes, we can alert you and you would be able to go in and update the associated regulation that corresponds to that federal law. Also cool feature that's kind of buried in ESPER, but it's like an Easter egg, is you're able to find similar or equivalent regulations in other states. So if you're
That's
looking
what I have done, actually. I was
yeah,
just
yeah.
about to say,
No, tell us more.
yeah, like we recently had some updated legislation, and we wanted to kind of see what other states have done or what they are doing. And so I was able to kind of pull in, I did a search and I was able to pull in all of the different state regs that were similar to the one I was looking for. And so I, was able to pull that all in and kind of give someone, here are some resources. And that was just so much easier than like Googling it. So
yeah. Or calling up the other department in like, Oklahoma and asking, what are you guys doing here?
Yeah, it's really nice that it's kind of all in one place.
It was a fun project that we built originally because we heard people say over and over, we were asking sort of, when you're going about and actually drafting a regulation and deciding what you're going to say and how it's going to be, what are you looking for? And they're like, well, obviously, like statute drives some of the content, but the most common question is, well, what's our neighboring state doing? Or what's like the region doing as a whole? And do we want to differentiate against that? Or do we want to align and build in reciprocity with some of our standards? And so to actually go through and figure out, well, what are the other states doing is very time consuming. Especially if you have to navigate some clunky state government websites for this. So we actually brought in all of this data and it's updated daily. So you've got, the neighboring states around you. If you type in nurse practitioner, for example, you'd be able to find those licensure requirements across the 50 states very quickly.
Yes, when I discovered that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is such a time saver.
This is a bit dorky, but we keep trying to figure out what's the best way to name this product feature. We love your suggestions. We call it similar regulations, but that's like not very sexy. Similar policies maybe. But we used to call it Esper Magic internally, but that didn't really translate with our customers. So if anyone has ideas, let us know.
Think about that.
Cool. Well, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the rulemaking package and what it's comprised of in New Hampshire for an interim rulemaking or typical promulgation. It's not just the text of the rule, right? You've got other documents that come into play. What does that look like?
Yes. So Esper, again, when I got here, it was all loaded up for me, but all of the documents that I need that come from the Office of Legislative Services are like preloaded into Esper. So I have my request for fiscal impact statement is already in the rulemaking package, and then I fill it out from there and I can export it when I need it. I've got my rulemaking register form, so when I have to send that over, I've got my final proposal cover sheet. And then those are the ones, and then I have an executive summary that I fill out for boards that I have in there. But then all of the other forms that I may or may not need are kind of loaded up in the background, so I can add them as needed, which is really nice. So every form that exists with OLS lives in Esper, and then I've got my main pieces for each interim or for each rulemaking package, and then I can add them in as I need, which is very cool.
Yeah, it's sort of the templatization of these documents. You in New Hampshire, I think it's OLS. In many other states, it's the Secretary of State that publishes the formal register and the actual administrative code of regulations. And from the SOS side, they just want to make sure that the rulemaking package shows up on time so that they can, publish in the register at a, the regular interval, and that all the documents are in like consistent format, the right template, so there's not a ton of back and forth between the OLS and the agency around document margins, for example. So when we built Esper's policy builder, which is what you actually use to, draft the regulations text and all of the accompanying documents, we wanted to make this package very easy and plug and play for the agency. So you're not worried about, is this the right template? Is this the right form? Is the font correct in order to be published? All of that's just preset for you, and you can focus on actually plugging in the information that you need. It's useful to people. I think especially for those coming into state government or starting out a rulemaking job. The institutional knowledge may not always be there. The manuals, like you said, may be a little bit hard to navigate. So having it preset is very helpful.
Yes. And I know it's going to be in there. I don't even have to go and like into another folder where I keep my templates and bring it in. Like it's there, it's ready to go, which is really nice.
One thing I wanted to know, I think we have several agencies from New Hampshire actually represented in attendance today. What have you learned about the New Hampshire's regulatory process that might be helpful to other rulemaking coordinators?
I don't know. I mean, I've only been here for a year, so I don't know that I would have anything to offer really. I do know that the attorneys over at OLS are really helpful, and anytime I have questions, they're always willing to hop on the phone with me and kind of talk through things. I brought in my program people when they haven't understood comments, and we've been able to talk. If I have questions about the manual, they're always willing to, talk it through and explain things to me. So I think just not being afraid to ask questions, which, you know, in the beginning, I was a little scared because I was like, everybody knows how to do this, but you know, everyone has to start somewhere. And so they are a really good resource, and they want you to succeed in the process, and they want to make sure that it's as easy for you as possible. So they've been really, really helpful.
Amazing. Cool. Let's see. Moving through here. Maybe we could talk briefly about public hearings and what that looks like. Just curious, I think especially because you mentioned you've got the state board and that their feedback and the advisory boards. Where does the public comment process sit in your rulemaking process overall? And how do you collect those comments? What does that look like?
So our public hearing process takes place 20 days. It has to be a minimum of 20 days after it's been published in the rulemaking register. And then prior to that, it has to be approved by the board first. So typically, our public hearing happens 2 months after the board has approved the initial proposal, unless it needs to be pushed back further for some reason. But I usually plan it for 2 months. And at that point, people can come to the meeting and they speak at the meeting, or we get a lot of written testimony. So I get a lot of emails, and if I get them prior to the meeting, I'll gather them all up and put them in a package for the board to read. If we get people coming to the meeting for a public hearing, I always sit and listen. And the meetings are recorded, so I can always go back and listen if I need to. But we definitely take all of that public comment and kind of gather it together to see if there's similarities or if there are things that we want to incorporate into the next draft. So depending on, again, stakeholders and who's involved, we may, you know, meet to kind of go over all of the public comments. Sometimes we don't get any public comments, depending on, you know, what the rule is and whether we've received comments throughout the process, or if it's more of the public that's coming forward at the comment. Because we involve so many stakeholders, a lot of times anyone that may be involved in the public comment may have already been involved in the drafting process.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the hack, right? Is public comments can actually slow down a rulemaking that like is really on a tight deadline. So you almost want to like front load as much of the stakeholder feedback as possible, so that when it comes time for the actual formal public comment period, you've kind of already knocked it all out, and like nothing is coming your way that isn't expected.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we see a lot of agencies do that. Cool. Well, I want to get to audience questions here in a couple minutes. But before we do that, a lot of agencies, when we start to work with them, they ask a lot about implementation with ESPR, but also what does it look like after ESPR is implemented at the agency? Do we disappear? Are we still around? Maybe would you mind sharing a little bit about your experience working with our customer success manager and how that's worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started, I had kind of an onboarding with ESPR, which was really nice. So I got to meet my customer success manager, and right now we meet monthly. And so we have monthly calls. Sometimes they're quick if I don't really have a lot. Sometimes I have a lot of questions or things that I want to change or see if it's possible to do. I've also given a lot of feedback or ideas that I've had, which has been, you know, they're always open to receiving that as well. But, you know, or I'll email a lot too if I have questions. And so you guys are very responsive, which is really nice, because I know that I don't have to wait too long to get an answer. If it's dealing with, you know, I think there was one time where one of my forms wasn't working or something, and, you know, or my interim process, for example, there was something was missing and you guys fixed it so quick. So it's really nice that I don't have to worry about not getting communication from you.
That's the goal. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I think a lot of government agencies have had bad experiences with technology vendors. And so I always like to just like throw in this question into webinars that we do with existing customers, just to let people know that we're partners for the long term. And I think our response time right now for any question that comes in averages like 7 minutes. So we're pretty quick.
Yeah, I
yeah.
actually emailed my CSM the other day pretty early because I started my day pretty early, and I think she sent me back a message like in 5 minutes, and you guys are in Texas.
Yeah.
So it was even earlier there. So I was like, whoa, I thought I was up early.
Jenny's up
So
earlier.
yep.
Last question, we'll get to audience Q&A. If someone were interested in adopting Esper, what advice would you give to them?
I think try to get as many people on board from your agency as possible so that you have as much use. The people at the agency that use Esper really love it. And then, there are some people that are a little scared. So I'm slowly trying to get people to get on it because change is hard. But once people use it and they realize how easy it is, I think it's pretty intuitive. I would say also that the resources that you guys have on your website, you have like videos and stuff, they're really easy to understand. And I think they give a really good kind of lay of the land of how things work. So I've used that a lot with some of my program people. If they, don't know how to do something or they can't figure it out, it's pretty easy to figure it out, I think. And there's a lot of good resources out there.
Amazing. Well, thank you. All right,
you.
we've got 35 people in attendance, and I'm sure someone has a question. So we have a couple options at the bottom of the bar. You can see there's Q&A, and then there's also the ability to raise your hand. If you're feeling brave, you can come on screen with us and chat and ask a question as well. I didn't realize that was an option, by the way.
Oh.
Until a webinar we did a couple months ago where I clicked and someone just magically appeared on the screen. So I was like, hello. All right, we got a question from Jen. This is a question from the IT perspective. If the agency I support decided to go with using Esper, where do the templates live? Are they uploaded and managed by the agency staff? How much involvement in the software is from internal IT personnel? I can answer this one if you want, Julie. So we have this configurable layer underneath Esper, underneath the hood. And it sort of comprises of 3 to 4 areas. You've got configurable roles and permissions. So, Julie is an administrative roles coordinator at the Department of Ed. She has sort of omnipotent powers at the agency, but other people have, more narrow sets of permissions, and that's configured within Esper. The next would be the workflows, whether it's an interim rule, an emergency rule, all of those have different corresponding workflows, and those are configured inside of Esper too, sort of like the stages and gates and people that rulemaking needs to go through. And the third, to answer your question, is templates. So basically the rulemaking text, how that needs to be templatized, any accompanying documents, all of that is configured by Esper's team as part of the implementation process. And if those documents change, we'll reconfigure them for you. So they're configured by us and not really required any IT resources. Typically, we see IT involved in 2 areas. One is any Active Directory integration you want to do or a single sign-on. A lot of agencies like to do that, and so we'll work with IT to set that up. And the second is typically when we start working with an agency, IT wants to make sure we're legit and not going to be hacked. So we'll go through any security vetting you have. We're FedRAMP authorized, just as an FYI. But we typically see IT involved in those 2 domains, not really in the configuration or templates. Whitney asks, what are you authorized? Oh, FedRAMP authorized. So FedRAMP is a security authorization or certification that is required by the federal government to work with any federal agencies. It is very expensive and intense security audit, but it basically means that things are locked up tight at Esper. And I will send you some more info on it, Whitney. All right, cool. Another question from Jen. What kind of licensing is involved? Is it yearly cost for use of the software, all in one package, agency staff? Okay, great questions. So annual subscription, and we price it based on tiered number of users, 1 to 10, 11 to 25, 26 to 50, so on and so forth. But we make a distinction between full access and read-only users. So for example, Julie and her program managers are going to be in there quite often. So they'll have full access, but you may have, advisory boards or people that really aren't going to be in the software every single day. So they probably shouldn't be paying the same price as full access users. So we just work with you to get the number of full access versus read-only and then incorporate those into the price quote. And then your second part of the question, sorry, I'm just seeing this. Agency staff work with us on assigning, removing roles as needed. Yes, if we are integrated with your Active Directory, we actually don't have to, remove roles. We'll just automatically switch on and off based on what's in Active Directory. But otherwise, if you need to add a new user, you can just email us and we'll quickly spin up their account and do a training if they want a training. How long has New Hampshire used Esper? Next question. I think this question predates you, Julie, right?
Yeah.
2020, 2021? It's been 3 years. 2020.
I think, yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like someone else would be able to answer that better than me, but I do know that it predates me. So I came in with this, which is great.
I think it's 2.5 years. Because
I feel like 2021 sounds right.
Yeah, like early 2021. I think the impetus was the COVID and all of the emergency regulations the department was doing. They were like, oh crap, we got to get some sort of digital tool in place. And so they reached out and they officially went live in 2021. So coming up in 2024 will be 3 years. How many New Hampshire agencies are using your Active Directory integration you mentioned? Well, the Department of Ed is our first and only agency in New Hampshire.
And I don't think you're using Active Directory.
No, I don't think you are. But if you want to, let us know. That could probably be a lot simpler if you want to add and remove people. But across our entire customer base, I would say probably a good 25% of all customers use Active Directory right now, whether it's Okta or single sign-on. So if you have a preference, let us know. Okay. 1D. How customizable is it with respect to setting internal deadlines? Programs within an agency can have different deadlines to meet. Julie, you want to tackle this one?
Yeah. So when these timelines for projects were built out, there are kind of existing deadlines in there. So based on, because we need to have our register done 20 days prior to public hearing, that's built in. But you can actually change the deadlines very easily. So a lot of times what I'll do is once I know that a project's going to be starting, but I know that I'm not going to actually need any deadlines until September, I'll put the project in, but I'll set the deadlines out even further so that I don't have to worry about it until it comes up, but I still have it on my radar. Or if something happens more quickly than I think it's going to, so I end up publishing to the register earlier than I thought, you can actually go in and update that, and then you can either leave just that date as it is, or you can make it move all your other deadlines up so that it all kind of stays together, which is really nice. So you have the option to change individual deadlines for different pieces of a project, or you can have your deadlines kind of aligned so that, if one thing gets pushed up, everything else gets pushed up too, and it moves along whatever your initial deadlines were. So my final draft deadline is still going to be 40 days ahead of whatever it is based on what I've put in.
Yeah, there's some flexibility there if you want to move every deadline or just one. Gosh, the questions are flooding in. It's great. Julie, are you able to see these, by the way?
I don't know. I'm having my mouse is like being kind of weird right now, so I'm doing as little as possible on my screen, so.
Okay, perfect. I'll continue to MC. All right, let's see. Leah says, as part of the rulemaking, we have dozens of forms that will be incorporated into a couple of rule chapters. Yep, pretty typical. Beyond version control of the rule draft itself, does the software have the ability to track create forms? Yep, all
Yes.
part of it. And I think we touched on it a little bit, but do you want to go deeper?
Yeah, I mean, you have the same tools for all of your forms as you do for like your kind of Word document in which you would put your rules. So it tracks your changes. It has all of the same resources that you would have for the actual draft of the text. So if people are going in and changing the forms, you'll be able to see it. You can accept the changes, you can reject it, all of that. So it all lives in that same project.
Yep. And if you're also making, in addition to the text of the rule, you're making a form for it. Maybe like it's a nurse practitioner rulemaking and you have
Oh,
to.
you're talking about those. Are you talking about like
Yeah.
forms that are going through the rulemaking process?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think it could have, your answer applies to both, but the answer is we can support that too. We work with a lot of environmental agencies that include forms in their rules, or they include equations, formulas, all of that. So you can incorporate those into Esper too. Hopefully that answers your question. Zach asks, can Esper work with any Westlaw products if there needs to be migration? Yeah, or integration. We can absolutely integrate. Would want to talk more about it, obviously, to understand if you're using Westlaw's research capabilities, because Esper has those too. So we don't want you to use two things at once that are redundant. But I would want to know a little bit more about the integration or migration you're thinking of. I thought we saw someone raise their hand. Maybe it was, there she is, Pamela. Cool. I think you're on the screen with us now. Can you hear us? I think you might be on mute. Let's see. All right, Pamela, I don't know if we can hear you. If you want to pop your question into the chat, maybe we'll try and answer it there. Okay, let's see. Jen asks, can a list of rules be exported at any given time, like an inventory of rules? Yes, Julia, I'll let you answer this one.
Yeah, so one of the tools that lives in Esper is it ties to GenCourt, and so it pulls in all of your rules. And you can export out an Excel spreadsheet that has whatever you want to have in it as far as the rule number, the rule title, the expiration date. And then you can also tag the rules. So if you have something that needs review because of legislation, you can kind of tag those as well. So you have a way to export out what you need so that if either someone's not using Esper or if you want to keep it in a different place, because I still have spreadsheets full of stuff as well, you can pull it right from Esper so you have all that data.
And Jen, you very nicely reminded me, is this a web-based user interface with the document management? Are these stored on Esper servers? We're cloud-based software platform, and we're hosted in AWS. So technically they're stored in AWS and encrypted servers. So hopefully that answers your question. If you are also thinking about document or data retention, we respect and follow whatever the state we're working with, what their data retention policy is. Rick asks, where can we view a demo of Esper? Can you provide us links? Happy to do a demo for you. It'll probably take about 20, 30 minutes, depending on how deep you want to go. So I can get in touch with you after this and we'll set up a bit of time to share how Esper works behind the hood. Rick also asks, how long will it take an agency to get up and running with Esper? Great question. 3 to 6 months is pretty typical implementation. 3, if you're an insanely organized agency who has all of your rulemaking documents and templates ready to go. 6, if maybe we help pull those together for you. But really just depends on the size of the agency and complexity. I mean, one of our customers is the NYPD. They're massive, 50,000 people. That took a year to get up and running. But other agencies are very quick. Okay. Whitney asks, what is the first step to get started? In terms of implementation or contracting, but I'll say implementation probably. So implementation, the way it works, we have a period called discovery, which for any lawyers on the Zoom is not discovery like legal discovery, but basically it's where those configurable elements I mentioned, the roles and permissions, templates, workflows, we got to gather all of that info from you so that we can configure it inside of Esper. So we'll say, can you share a list of everyone that needs full access or limited access to Esper and their names and emails? And, what workflows do you have? And what are the stages and gates and key deadlines that happen on every rulemaking? And we take all of that information from discovery and we configure it inside of Esper. So configuration is on our end. We'll configure everything you gave us. And then we'll do validation with you where we present everything and say, this is, what we configured. Does this match what you're expecting? And maybe there's like a little bit of remediation where you say, oh, this deadline should be 2 weeks out, not 1 week out, or, things like that. And then after we validate it and even done some user testing where you can go in and test it before we go live, we'll go live and we'll do launch and training. We actually have really been enjoying in post-pandemic life going on site and training with people in person. It's fun. We bring donuts. The NYPD thought that was a little bit on the nose when they did that. They told us they preferred bagels. So just let us know what your preferred breakfast is. And we'll come on site, we'll train with you and, be available afterwards, like Julie mentioned, monthly calls to see how things are going and what we can help with. Jen, I love your questions. So is Esper sole source contract with the state or do you work through software resellers? Both. So we are sole sourced in several states, including Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Montana. We also work with resellers across the board. Honestly, whatever the agency prefers. Some states don't like to do sole source. I get that. So we work with basically every reseller under the sun, whether it's SHI, Vertisoft, Carasoft, you name it, we've got it. All right. Any other questions coming in? All right. Another question from Jen. Jen, we might need to do just a follow-up conversation. What about post-implementation? Do you have a help desk with posted business hours? Yes, we do. So our business hours, I believe, are 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time, but I would say we have a bunch of night owls on our team, so take that with a grain of salt in terms of, we'll be around more readily than that. So post-implementation, immediately after we go live with you, you're in a period of what's called hypercare. So Julie, you weren't here for this part, but hypercare is when, we're touching base pretty regularly. How's adoption going internally, and just really available. But then even after hypercare, you've got a dedicated customer success manager. You've got 24/7 support inside the app. And then a monthly, at least customer success check-in call that, we'll do. If you have, immediate questions about the product or concerns, you can also just email support@esper.com and we'll get back to you pretty quickly. Awesome questions. Thanks so much, guys. All right. Any last questions? Thank you, Jen. She's saying she reached out from the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So appreciate all your questions. We're really grateful. If no further questions, Julie, thanks for your time. Very, very
Thank you
grateful.
for having me. I'm so happy to talk to you about Esper because I love it. So
Well, great. We're happy to be here for you guys. Any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll actually just pop my email here in the chat for everyone, so you've got it. Go. And this video will be going live on YouTube. So we'll post that and just send it to everyone so that you've got it afterwards. If you want to circulate it internally or, rewatch back to listen to jokes that we make about naming similar regulations or about how logistics work, any of that. All right, y'all, have a great rest of your Thursday. Talk to you soon.
thank you.
Bye.